Hey there, and welcome to Edit My Photo for May 2021. This image submitted by Astrid is just gorgeous, but it needs work to brighten and enhance the soft, warm tones lurking within the raw file. There's also a bunch of distractions we need to remove. Feel free to follow along from start to finish or fast track through the tutorial using the chapter links below. And as always, if you like the video, please subscribe to this channel for more pet photography, shooting and editing tips and tricks. Hi, I'm Charlotte Reeves from Unleashed Education, and you've tuned in to another episode of Edit My Photo. We run these editing challenges in the Unleashed Education membership. The challenge runs monthly and goes through a few different stages. Firstly, I submit one of my raw images for members to download and edit. I took this photo of Jasper the Beagle for my book, Tales of Brisbane, back in 2016. Jasper's location for the book was a lookout with views over the city of Brisbane. I presented this edit with no particular goals. I just told members to go for it. I was so blown away with the quality, variety and sheer creativity of the entries in this challenge. We had all kinds of approaches ranging from realistic and minimal to complete fantasy. Out of all the submissions, I chose Astrid's edit because the sky replacement is one of the best I've ever seen. Its success is due to the way she's carefully matched the light direction, intensity and depth of field. The end result is a totally believable and incredibly beautiful image. In the second stage of the challenge, the winner of the challenge gets to submit an image for me to edit. And Astrid submitted this raw image right here. While this is a shot of Astrid's own dog, I'm going to approach this edit as if it was shot for a client as part of a full session, which means I'm going to try and keep things simple, so no complicated color grading or masking in Photoshop. As a result, this edit could be easily replicated for a whole gallery of images in a reasonable amount of time. If you're shooting for clients, keeping editing time to a minimum is essential for staying profitable in your business. Make sure you watch all the way to the end so you can see the final result. And as always, I welcome your questions and feedback in the comments. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom with Astrid's photo. Now we can see from the EXIF data, this has been shot with a Nikon D500 with a 105mm f1.4 lens at f1.4. So it has a very, very shallow depth of field, which is really lovely because that helps to create the foreground, the middle ground and the background layers and give a sense of separation of the subject. So the exposure choices have been really good for this image. Because it's a backlit shot, there are some very bright highlights, especially in the rim lights, so the light falling on the back of the dog that you can see around the edges of the dog. So the good thing is, because the whole image is underexposed a little bit, these highlights around the edge actually aren't blown out. They haven't lost detail, which is really, really good. If this image was exposed more for the dog, the background and those highlights in the background would probably be blown out and we would probably not have that detail there. Now the white balance in this image is something that we're going to need to fix up a little. It's quite warm and quite green, so we're definitely going to be brightening the image up a lot and also kind of reducing that green cast by adding some magenta. So I'm going to whip through here and do some global adjustments using the sliders in the basic panel and also the tone curve panel. So I'll whip through really quickly and do those, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat about what I've done afterwards. I think those adjustments are pretty good, so I'm just going to do a quick before and after. So as you can see, we've definitely brightened the image up a lot. I tried to fill the shadows and brighten the image with the exposure slider without losing detail in the highlights, in part because I took the highlights down. That helped to keep those highlights under control. I added a bit of clarity and some vibrance, and I also had to play around with the sliders under the tone curve as well. And finally, I just added a little bit of blue primary saturation in the calibration panel. That helps to give the image a nice vibrant kind of look. So to enhance that background even further, I'm just going to add a little bit of flare in the background. So I'm going to grab the radial adjustment tool here, and I'm going to click and drag down from the top where I think the flare should be. Now it's going to go over the dog, that's okay, we're going to brush that off the dog. So it's going to take up quite a bit of the background, so I'm thinking around that kind of area. We can press O on the keyboard, which shows you the overlay of where that mask is going to apply to. I'm just going to invert that because we want it to apply within the circle rather than outside the circle. So I'll whip through and do these adjustments, and then we'll go over them afterwards. Alrighty, so the aim for the background adjustments here to create this flare is I wanted to reduce contrast, so I've done that through the contrast slider and also bringing the clarity slider down, but especially the dehaze slider. So taking the dehaze slider to the left, which is basically dehazing it, which is introducing haze. So to decrease the contrast even more, I've taken the shadows and the blacks up. I've also taken the highlights down a little bit too. So if we have a look without that adjustment and then with that adjustment, we've introduced this very kind of pinkish yellow romantic sort of haze to the background, which I really like, and I feel like it really suits this image. So we just need to make sure we brush this off the dog. So I'm going to go to the brush section of this. So with this same adjustment selected, I'm going to press O on the keyboard so I can actually see the overlay, so I know where to brush it off the dog. I'm just going to click erase and then go in here with this brush. I'm just using the square brackets keys on the keyboard to adjust the brush size, larger or smaller. I'm going to turn auto mask off for now and just go in and do these bits. And then I'm going to turn auto mask on and go in and do all the fine stuff near the edges. Now, because it's on auto mask, it will detect the edges of the fur. And usually Lightroom does a pretty good job of this. Okay, so judging by the mask, I seem to have brushed that off most of the dog. I'm not too worried about it bleeding over slightly on the edges of the fur, because when you think about it, if there is light coming from behind and it has a certain quality, you would expect to see that on the rim light in the fur. So it doesn't bother me if it's not absolutely exact there. So I'll press O on the keyboard to turn that overlay off, and then press enter to commit that and zoom out. Let's just have a look and see what it looks like without and with. So that's without that background adjustment, and that is with. So something else that we're going to do in Lightroom before we take the image into Photoshop is to have a little bit of a fiddle with the foreground here. So I'm going to grab a graduated filter, drag that up from the bottom, and reduce the contrast. I'm going to make it not so eye-catching. So any of the sharp bits and all the contrast in the foreground, I want to kind of tone that down a little bit. So I'm going to take the contrast right down and also take the exposure down a bit, along with the clarity. So that just helps to, I guess, soften the edges, any sharp edges a bit. And also I'm just going to take dehaze down a little bit too, because that really helps to soften things off. So let me just take that exposure down a little bit more. Okay, if I turn that off and then on again, see how it's just sort of taken any of the attention grabbing bits and pieces in the foreground away, and now our focus goes straight into the dog's face rather than kind of getting stuck at the bottom there. So let's take a look at how far we've come so far. So if I press backslash on the keyboard to give us a before and then an after. So I'm pretty happy with how this image is looking in Lightroom so far. Now I'm going to take it into Photoshop and do some cleaning up. Okay, so welcome back. We're now in Photoshop. I've exported the image as a high resolution PSD file for us to continue working on. the main object of taking this into Photoshop is so we can clean up some of the distractions in the image. I'm going to be using a lot of content aware to do this. While I really like the little ground cover plants that sort of are creeping in from the sides here, I think that adds a nice little bit of framing. There are some bits of plant that I feel are a little bit too close to the subject and a little bit too detailed. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove this whole section here. I'm going to remove this bit here, this bit coming over, the red bit coming over the paw here, this really sharp bit here, and I think we might leave that bit there because it's quite out of focus and it sort of adds to it, but this dead bit here can go as well. So we've got quite a bit of cleaning up to do. My philosophy with this kind of thing, I feel that content aware works best when you select everything that you want gone in a particular area of the image and then content aware rather than doing it in patches. But over time, I've come to realize that Photoshop does tend to work better when you just get rid of basically everything you want to get rid of at once. I'm going to just go in and select this whole section first, and we'll do a content aware fill and see how that goes. Alrighty, so I've basically selected everything in this area that I want to get rid of all at once. So I'm now going to press delete and then fill with content aware and cross my fingers and hope for the best. Okay, so that hasn't done too bad of a job actually. Sometimes you need to go in with the clone stamp tool and just do a little bit of fixing up. So let's have a go with this bit here. Okay, that's a pretty good selection. So delete, content aware fill, deselect. That's actually not too bad. So the only bit that looks strange here is we've got a bit of a duplicate bit here. So I'm just going to repatch that little duplicated bit. And it might need a little bit of blending later on to kind of really fine tune it. And I'm also going to get rid of this, but I'm pretty happy with that. So on to the next bit. Alright, so that's all been selected there. You might have seen in that little speed edit section that I actually switched to the polygonal lasso tool, and that allowed me to create a straight line selection. That's really handy for things like, twigs and blades of grass and things. That's just another way that you can use the selection tools to quickly and easily create the shape of the selection that you need. Anyway, so let's press delete, content aware fill, deselect. Yeah, that's pretty good. What else are we going to remove? So this little red bit across the paw here, I'm not really liking either. So I'm going to go in and select that. Okay, content aware fill. Yep, that's done a pretty good job. Now, the reason I didn't go up into the harness is because I'm thinking about removing the harness. Now, if this was a client session, I would have insisted that the harness be removed. I tell my clients that I won't remove the harness. If the harness is on in the photos, it's not something that I can remove. It's a little bit of a lie because I can remove it. It just takes so long. It's so time consuming to do it on every single photo in a gallery. So basically, if the harness is on, that's how the dog looks. But if you do need to remove a harness, you can do it. It just takes a bit more time. So I'm going to just do a content aware fill to try and remove this harness. So you can see there I've selected the harness, but I've also left a little bit of room on either side. And that's mainly because when a dog's wearing a harness, a fluffy dog is wearing a harness, it tends to imprint into the fur a little bit. So you get a bit of shadowing on either side. So I kind of want to remove the shadowing as well. So let's do a content aware fill. So as you can see, it's definitely not perfect and it needs to be blended. So I'm going to go in here and do a pretty quick kind of blend. Okay, so that's probably about as good as I'm going to get it without spending hours on it. I guess you just really need to accept that there are limitations sometimes when it comes to trying to remove things like harnesses. I'm going to whip around and do a little bit more tidying up. Okay, done. I'm going to do a little bit of what I call painting with light now. So I would like to brighten up the dog's face a little bit more and maybe darken off this foreground as well. So I like to use the Dodge and Burn tools. They are found over here. So I have keyboard shortcuts set up for them, A for the Dodge tool and Z for the Burn tool. Basically, it's just a way of lightening and darkening selected areas of the image. I always have it on mid-tones and a very low exposure, so I can use multiple brush strokes to build up the effect. So I just did a little bit of dodging on the dog's face there and sort of brighten things up a little bit. And then I'm going to switch to the Burn tool, make sure I've got a nice big brush, and I'm just going to run across the bottom here and just darken off this foreground just a little bit more. So again, I'm using multiple brush strokes to build up this effect. Now, darken over here a little bit. Now I've just noticed here as well that I'm not really a fan of what looks like a tree over at the top left of the image here as well. So I'm going to get rid of that too. So the last thing I'm going to do here in Photoshop is just run my polish up action. So if you're in the Unleashed Education membership, you'll have access to be able to download this action as part of reel shoots. I'm just going to run this real quick. It creates a bunch of adjustment layers basically. And in episode 7 of reel shoots, I actually take you through and show you how I use this action to really give images that final sort of finishing touch. So I'm just going to use the sharpen here and get a little bit more of a bright catch light in the dog's eyes. I don't want to change the color of the eyes. I just want to bring out a little bit of extra structure, give a nice catch light. The action also creates some additional layers like vibrance, saturation, contrast levels, just to give a bit of an overall boost. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to flatten this image and save it and open it up back in Lightroom to finish it off. So here we are back in Lightroom. Now the main thing I'm going to do here is a crop. I'm going to press R on the keyboard to bring the crop tool up. Now it's kind of got a bit of a centered, almost centered sort of composition at the moment, but I'm just going to crop it in a little bit tighter, maybe put the eye on that top third line, and maybe just give a little bit of extra space on the right hand side of the image. Because the dog's body and head is sort of pointing towards that side, I want to leave negative space on that side of the image for the dog to look into. So I'm thinking a composition something like that will be quite nice. I'm also going to add just another little vignette over the top here. It just gives you a little bit more control over where the central point of the vignette is. So I'm just going to take the exposure down around the edges. And then because that light is kind of coming from the top right, I'm going to turn the overlay on, go to the brush, erase, make sure it's a nice big brush with a big feather. Make sure auto mask is turned off, and then just sort of erase that darkening effect from this kind of area here, because that is where my light is coming from. So if I turn that overlay mask off, and we just do a really quick before and after of that particular effect. So off and on, see how it's just darkened the edges a little bit, draws your focus into the dog. Now, one thing that's bothering me in this image here is I feel like there's a little bit of a green cast on the underside of the dog's chin. So I'm just going to go in quickly with an adjustment brush, and I could have done this in Photoshop as well, but I've only really just noticed it now. Just goes to show you can do things in Photoshop or you can do it in Lightroom. Often it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to make sure auto mask is turned off, and I'm just going to brush along where I see this color cast. And I'm just going to take that tint a little bit to the magenta side to counteract the green. So magenta is the opposite of green. And then also just take the saturation down as well in those areas. And that should clean up that greenish kind of cast under the chin quite nicely. So I think we have a finished image here. So I hope you've enjoyed the journey. This is the sort of edit that it's probably a little bit more in detail than I would normally do if I was editing, say, 40 images for a client. This is the sort of edit that I would do if this image was being printed. I might not go to quite the extent of removing the harness, obviously, and also removing as many distractions as I did if I was just showing the image to the client. Generally, I'll show them like a 99% edit. If this image was being printed though, I would definitely go to this extent. So I hope you've enjoyed watching me edit Astrid's photo, and until next time, happy shooting and editing. See you later. Hi, me again. If you're wondering how you can get involved in these challenges, it's easy. You just need to be a member of Unleashed Education, a pet photography education membership created by myself, Charlotte Reeves, and fellow pet photographer extraordinaire Craig Turner-Bullock. Between us, we have 34 years of experience as professional photographers, and yes, that does make us feel a little bit old. Along with this monthly Edit My Photo challenge, the membership includes access to our premium pet photography courses, educational videos, ebooks, guest artist videos, editing tutorials, 3 monthly live calls, and of course, a private members-only Facebook group. Through the membership, Craig and I share all of our best shooting and editing education, everything you need to become a better pet photographer, plus stacks of inspiration, packaged up in a great little community. Craig and I would love to have you join us in the membership. If you'd like to find out more, just check out the link in the description.